My son sent me a message. Don't come to my grandson's birthday. My wife has invited important guests, and you won't fit in. But I had already paid for the entire banquet at a fancy restaurant. I simply made a phone call and canceled the reservation. Let them celebrate at home. In the morning, my son started begging, saying he had been misunderstood, but I no longer believed him. My real gift for my grandson was delivered a little later, and it changed everything. Hello, my dear listeners. My name is Lydia, and today I want to tell you my story. If you enjoy tales like this, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. It always warms my heart when I read your comments and find out which cities and countries you're listening from. Please write where you're from. It would be a great pleasure for me. And now enjoy the story. Hands remember what the head sometimes forgets. My hands remember everything. They remember the cool smoothness of the old piano keys, the rough cover of my father's sheet music books, the tiny fingers of my son, Alex, when he was just learning to walk. And right now my hands are kneading dough. It's a special ritual, almost a sacrament. In my old kitchen, in the apartment where I was born and raised, time flows differently. It doesn't rush headlong like it does out there in the big city, but stretches slowly like honey from a jar. The air here is saturated with the smells of my life. Baked apples, old books, and this sweet yeasty aroma of dough. I'm making Michael's favorite pastries with cabbage and apples. Tomorrow is my grandson's birthday. 12 years old. A whole life. I plunge my fingers into the warm, pliable living dough. It breathes under my palms. This simple, monotonous work is calming. It gives a sense of rightness, of some eternal, unshakable foundation. My mother and her mother did it this way. The women in our family have always expressed love through care. Through something tangible, through warm bread, through an ironed shirt, through a silent presence in difficult times. I was no exception. Giving became my essence. First, out of necessity. When my Leo passed away, Alex was still very young. I had to forget about the conservatory, about my dreams of a solo career on the big stage. I had to raise my son, put him on his feet. I worked at a music school, gave private lessons, mended clothes, saved money, denied myself everything. My whole life, all my energy was invested in him, as in the most precious project. Then giving became a habit. My son grew up, got married, he had his own family, his own life. And I continued to give. First, I helped with the down payment on their mortgage, sold the country house, the only thing left from my husband. Then I sat with little Michael so that Stella, my daughter-in-law, could go back to work. Then, modest but regular transfers from my teacher's pension to help the young couple. They took it for granted and I didn't expect gratitude. I was doing it for myself. It seemed to me that as long as I was needed, as long as I could give something, I was alive. And so this morning I gave. Only this time not a modest part of my pension. This morning I transferred a sum to Alex's account that made my own breath catch for a second. A sum equal to 3 or even 4 of my pensions. I had been saving this money for several years, putting aside from the lessons I still occasionally gave to the neighbors' children, from the small amount I received for renting out a tiny room left to me by a second cousin. Alex and Stella thought I lived on my pension alone. Let them think so. I didn't want to let them in on my modest financial secrets. This money was my gift to Michael for his 12th birthday. Not into his hands, of course. It was the payment for a banquet at the plaza. Stella had once mentioned that she dreamed of celebrating her son's birthday on a proper level. That it was useful for Alex's career to make the right connections, and a birthday was an excellent occasion to invite his boss and his wife in an informal setting. I had said nothing then, but I had heard everything. I saw how her eyes lit up at the word plaza. And I saw how Alex sighed, looking at the prices on the online menu. And I decided let my boy have a real celebration. A lavish one, like in the movies with crystal glasses, snow-white tablecloths, and a dozen enthusiastic guests. Let him feel like a prince. And the fact that this celebration would help his father's career, well, that would be an additional bonus. When I told them I would pay for everything, Stella was speechless for a moment. And then she started chirping, bustling about, making guest lists. Alex just came up, awkwardly put his arm around my shoulders and said, "Thanks, Mom." There was relief in his voice, and I felt a pang of quiet, bitter joy. I was needed again. I could be useful again. My invisible foundation on which their well-being stood was still strong. The dough under my hands became smooth and elastic. I cover it with a clean towel, put it in a warm place by the radiator, let it rise, and an unbidden memory surfaces. A recent conversation a week ago when everything was already ordered and paid for. Emboldened, I asked, "Stella, what should I wear?" "Maybe my blue crepe dress. The one I wore at my conservatory graduation. I love that dress. It's a severe dark blue with a small turn-down collar of Brussels lace. It's like an anchor that holds me in my past, real life. In the life where I was not just a mother and a grandmother, but Lydia, a promising pianist." Stella gave me a quick, appraising look, the kind one gives to an item in a second-hand store, deciding if it's worth the asking price. She didn't say anything offensive out loud. She just wrinkled her nose slightly, waved her hand, and said to her husband over her shoulder, just quietly enough so that I supposedly wouldn't hear, "Alex, but it's so old." Alex, my son, my protector, just shrugged and looked away. He didn't stand up for me. He never stands up for me. He always tries to be somewhere in the middle, so as not to offend his wife or his mother. And in the end, with his passivity, he betrays both. I pretended not to hear, then smiled and said, "All right, I'll think about it, I'll pick something." I swallowed that insult as I had swallowed dozens of others before. I swallowed it and forced myself to forget. The main thing was Michael's party, his happy eyes. Everything else was trivial dust. I was so used to thinking that way, used to my role of being convenient, inconspicuous, and useful. An old thing, an old dress, an old woman. We are not thrown away as long as we can still be of use. The peaceful quiet of the kitchen, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the rising dough, all this was my world, my fortress. And at that very moment the silence was pierced by a shrill buzzing, like a needle prick. On the kitchen table lay my old flip phone. I don't like these newfangled smartphones. I have no use for them. Alex had given me this one several years ago, so that Mom is always in touch. The buzzing didn't stop. A message. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the table. A few lines from Alex glowed on the small screen. I put on my glasses and began to read. I read it once. The words seemed like a set of letters devoid of meaning, as if they were written in a foreign language that I once knew but had completely forgotten. I read it a second time. "Mom, plans have changed. Don't come to the restaurant tomorrow. Stella has invited some very important people from work. You understand, you just won't fit in. We'll see each other during the week. You just won't fit in." The world didn't collapse. There was no explosion, no scream. Something much more terrible happened. The world simply disappeared. The warmth that I had so carefully preserved in my kitchen evaporated in an instant, as if it had been blown out by a draft from a door flung wide open into an icy void. The ticking of the clock stopped, or maybe something inside me stopped. My hands, dusted with flour, remained lying on the table. I looked at them as if they were someone else's. The fingers of a pianist, the fingers of a mother, the fingers of a grandmother. Now they were just a piece of frozen wax. From under the towel on the bowl came that same familiar sweet smell of rising dough. The smell of love, of home, of care. I inhaled it and for the first time in my life, felt absolutely nothing. It had become just a smell, a chemical element in the air, empty. Resentment, pain, humiliation, no, none of that was there. The part of me that should have been cringing in pain right now, screaming, crying, it was as if it had been amputated. It had been cauterized for so long, so methodically, drop by drop, year by year, that in its place was only a smooth, cold, insensitive scar. A silence fell in my soul, an absolute, ringing silence, like in a winter forest at night. And in that deafening silence, for the first time in many years, I heard myself. I didn't cry. Tears are for those who still have hope or the strength to fight. I had neither. There was only this deafening, transparent silence inside. I slowly went to the sink and turned on the tap. Cool water poured over my hands, washing away the white flour dust. I watched it turn into milky streams and disappear into the dark maw of the drain. I rubbed my hands palm against palm, finger by finger, cleaning the remnants of dough from under my nails. The movements were methodical, measured, as if I were preparing for a complex operation, not just washing my hands. It was not a cleansing, it was a farewell. I was washing away decades of a sticky, viscous role of an all-forgiving mother and a reliable grandmother. The restless, fussy part of my heart, the one that had always fluttered, wanting to please, to help, to smooth over the rough edges. It fell silent forever. In its place a smooth, cold void formed, and in that void a clarity was born, icy sharp as a shard of glass. The message from Alex was not a mistake, not an unfortunate turn of phrase of a weak man trying to please a domineering wife. No, it was a verdict, final and not subject to appeal. I was an inconvenience, a social liability that, at a crucial moment, was easier to hide in a closet like old furniture so as not to spoil the view for important guests. I was that same old crepe dress that was out of place against the backdrop of the glitter and tinsel of their new life. A life whose foundation was laid on my sacrifices. I turned off the water and took a clean, starched linen towel from the hook. It smelled of lavender and the sun. I slowly dried my hands, feeling the familiar, calming roughness of the fabric. My gaze slid around the kitchen, into the living room visible through the doorway. This apartment, it wasn't just walls. It was my chronicle. There was the faded spot on the wallpaper where Alex's cradle had hung. There was the scratch on the parquet floor where little Michael had first ridden his tricycle. And there was the empty corner by the window. Once it had stood there. My piano. An old German one with ivory keys yellowed by time and thousands of touches. My father's gift. Not for my 12th birthday but earlier when I was only 10. But on my 12th birthday he had given me something more valuable. I remember that day as if it were yesterday. My father, an engineer with a quiet voice and incredibly warm eyes, came into the room, hiding something behind his back. He hadn't brought me a doll or a fashionable dress. He held out a thin folder with sheet music. Chopin's Nocturnes. And he said the words that I have carried with me all my life. Your soul, Lydia, is made for art, not for pots and pans and fuss. Remember that always. I remembered. For a long time I remembered. And then Alex was born. Then my Leo was gone. Art had to be put aside. And then sold altogether. This memory came flooding back now with an unexpected, piercing force. Alex was 20. He had just graduated from college, got his first, not very well-paying job and desperately wanted a car. Not just any car, but a foreign one. Mom, you understand it's about status. People will look at me differently, he would say. We had no money. And then I sold the piano. My father's. I remember the movers coming, how they awkwardly tied it with straps, how it groaned plaintively when they lifted it off the floor. I watched from the window as they loaded it into the back of a truck, and felt as if something living was being taken out of me. Alex got his car. He was happy. He hugged me, kissed me, and said, Mom, you're the best. I'll pay you back for everything, you'll see. He didn't pay it back. Not with money, not even with memory. He just consumed my sacrifice like one eats a piece of bread when hungry. Thoughtlessly, quickly, to satisfy a momentary need. And now, almost 30 years later, the son of the woman who had sold the soul of her music for his status was writing to her that she wouldn't fit in. The cold clarity inside me turned into a cold resolve. I no longer hesitated, no longer thought. The plan was born instantly in its entirety, as if it had always been in me, waiting for its hour. I walked from the kitchen to the living room. My gait was firm, my back was straight. I went to my old secretary desk made of dark oak, opened a small drawer smelling of sealing wax and old paper, and took out a thick address book in a leather cover. Another thing from that past life. My fingers, no longer trembling, confidently flipped through the pages with faded ink. Metropole. There it was, the number, written in my daughter-in-law's neat handwriting. I picked up the receiver of the landline phone, heavy, made of black bakelite. I dialed the number. My fingers moved clearly without a single mistake. The long rings began. On the other end, a pleasant male voice answered. introducing himself as the administrator. And then I heard my own voice. It was calm, even, and completely unfamiliar to me. There was no trace of resentment in it, no hint of the senile tremor my relatives were so used to. It was the voice of a person giving orders. "Good evening," I said. "I am calling to cancel a reservation in the name of the Baronoffs for tomorrow evening." "One moment," the administrator said. "The Baronoffs, yes, I see. A banquet hall for 25 people. You want to cancel the entire reservation?" "Yes," I answered just as evenly. "The entire event." "Thank you." "All right, I'm canceling it. Goodbye." "Goodbye." I slowly placed the receiver back on the cradle. The quiet click sounded in the quiet apartment like the shot of a starting pistol. I took one deep, slow breath and exhaled. It was the first breath of truly free air in the last 40 years. In the evening, I didn't finish making the pastries. I ruthlessly threw the risen, fluffy dough into the trash. I just brewed myself a cup of strong black tea with bergamot and sat in my favorite armchair by the window. Outside, the lights of the city were coming on, but for the first time I didn't feel like a lonely speck in this huge city. I felt whole. Around 9 in the evening, my cell phone rang. I looked at the screen. Michael, grandson. My heart trembled, but this time it wasn't pain. It was a wave of tenderness. I answered. "Grandma?" A quiet, guilty voice came on the line. "Yes, Michael, I'm listening." "Grandma, why aren't you coming tomorrow? Mom said you couldn't make it." He hesitated. I heard her talking to Dad. He suddenly whispered very quietly, apparently from another room. "I told Mom it wasn't nice to talk to you like that." There he was. My little knight. My only true ally in this family. The pain that I had held at bay for so long could have broken through now. But instead my chest filled with a warm, pure, piercing love for this boy. "Don't worry, my dear," I said, and my voice became soft again, but there was a new strength in it, unfamiliar to him. "Everything is fine. Absolutely fine." I paused for a second and added, "And my real gift for you is already on its way. It will be something special. Something just for us." The night passed calmly. For the first time in many years I slept without dreams, a deep restorative sleep. I woke up not to an alarm clock, but because I was rested. The room was filled with a soft, peach-colored light of the nascent day. Today was Michael's birthday, and for the first time in many years, this morning was not a marathon for me. Usually on such a day, I would have been on my feet since 6 in the morning, finishing the pastries, making the aspic that Alex loved so much, checking if my formal dress was ironed, counting the money in the envelope for my grandson's gift 100 times. Fuss, anxiety, the desire to do everything perfectly so that no one would be disappointed. This morning, I allowed myself the luxury of not rushing. I slowly got up, put on my old but favorite robe and went to the kitchen. I put the kettle on, took a beautiful porcelain cup from the sideboard, from the service I had inherited from my mother, and which I had been saving for a special occasion. Apparently, the special occasion had arrived. I brewed a strong black tea, put in a slice of lemon and 1 spoonful of sugar, not 2 as usual but 1. I sat by the window, took a sip of the hot, tart drink, and began to watch the city wake up. A sunbeam broke through the leaves of the old poplar tree outside the window and lay on the parquet floor, highlighting the golden dust dancing in the air. It was quiet, peaceful. And in that silence, around 8 in the morning, the first call came. The sharp, piercing trill of my old cell phone was a dissonance in the morning harmony. I didn't even flinch. I calmly looked at the table where it lay. The screen lit up. "Alex." I let it ring. The trill stopped. Silence. I took another sip of tea. A minute later, the phone rang again. The same insistent, demanding trill. Again, "Alex." I watched the dancing dust motes in the sunbeam. I was curious how many times he would call, as if I were observing some scientific experiment. The phone fell silent, then again and again, 5 or 6 times in a row. He had never been so persistent. So it had happened. They had found out. On the 7th time, I decided it was time. Time to raise the curtain in this little theater. I took the phone. My hand didn't tremble. Yes, Alex, I'm listening, I said in an even, calm voice. There was a silence on the other end for a second. He obviously hadn't expected such calmness. And then he burst. Mom! Mom, what happened? His voice was a mixture of panic and some desperate, false cheerfulness. I just got a call from the restaurant. They said you canceled everything. It's some kind of mistake, right? You probably misunderstood them. Or they mixed something up. I took a slow sip of tea, giving him a chance to exhale this stream of words. The pause dragged on. I could hear him breathing heavily into the phone. There is no mistake, Alex, I said quietly but distinctly. Every word fell into place like a stone in a wall. What no mistake? He was stammering, his voice breaking. Mom, don't you understand? There's a banquet, guests, Stella's boss and his wife. Everyone is invited for 7 in the evening. You have to call them right now and fix everything. Say there was a misunderstanding. Why? I asked just as calmly. What do you mean why? He almost shouted. For Michael. It's his birthday. You can't punish a child because of some of your resentments. Ah, there it was. Their main trump card. The child. The sacred shield with which they covered any of their meanness and any of their selfishness. But this shield no longer worked. I am not punishing Michael, I answered, and there was not a drop of warmth in my voice, only a cold, impeccable logic. I am merely following your instructions, son. What instructions? Are you in your right mind? Quite. Yesterday you sent me a message. Let me remind you of its contents. Mom, don't come, you won't fit in. I quoted it exactly. There was a heavy, viscous silence on the other end again. Mom, but you misunderstood everything, he began to mumble. I understood everything exactly as it was written, I interrupted him. You have also repeatedly emphasized how important these guests are for Stella and for your career. And I agree with you. An important event requires careful preparation and the elimination of all possible risks. I was a risk, an awkward old woman in an old dress who could say the wrong thing and spoil your evening. I realized that perfectly, so I eliminated the obstacle. I made sure that you could shine in your perfect world, unburdened by my presence. You should be grateful to me. I solved your problem. He was silent for so long that I thought the connection had been lost. But then I heard a suppressed, furious whisper. You just ruined your own grandson's birthday. Do you even realize what you've done? Stella is hysterical. Michael is sitting in his room. You've spoiled the holiday for everyone. How could you be so selfish? Selfish. That word, thrown by him, didn't hurt me. Seemed absurd to me. My whole life I had lived for him, for them. I had sold my piano, my soul, for his car. I had given my savings for their mortgage. I had given thousands of hours of my life sitting with his son. I had given my last savings for this damned banquet. And now I was selfish. It was even funny. Alex, I said just as evenly, you are not arguing with me now. You are arguing with a ghost. With the woman you and Stella created for your own convenience. With that reliable, all-forgiving mother who was supposed to swallow the humiliation, smile, and send her grandson an envelope with money. Who was supposed to sit quietly at home while you celebrate at her expense. But the thing is, that woman no longer exists. She died last night when she read your message. Mommy! His voice suddenly broke, switched to a whiny, childish note. All his feigned rage disappeared. All that was left was fear and confusion. Mommy, please call them, fix everything. I'm begging you. What are we supposed to do now? He had become a little boy again, who had broken an expensive vase and was now asking his mother to glue it all back together and make it so that Dad wouldn't scold him. But I no longer had any glue or comfort for him. I silently finished my tea. He was still saying something into the phone, something about shame, about the guests, about how Stella would kill him. It was just white noise, the background sound of a distant, alien life that no longer had anything to do with me. I have nothing more to say to you, Alex, I said, for the first time in many years calling him by his full name. And I gently pressed the end call button. I put the phone on the table, screen down, took my porcelain cup and carried it to the sink. The apartment was quiet again. But now it was different. It was not the silence of loneliness, it was the silence of freedom. I stood in the middle of my living room, flooded with morning sun, and felt the weight I had been carrying for decades fall from my shoulders. I had left them alone in the ruins they had so diligently built themselves. The phone lay on the table, dark and silent. I looked at it, but I didn't see it. My gaze was directed inward, into that new quiet emptiness that no longer frightened me. It was not the emptiness of absence, but the emptiness of possibilities, like a clean sheet of paper before an artist. The noise of my former family's life, Alex's panic, Stella's hysterics, their social collapse, reached me like the roar of a distant, alien street. It no longer penetrated the walls of my apartment, the walls of my new calm. I felt no gloating, no satisfaction, only a detachment, as if I were watching the characters of a long-forgotten film whose passions and tragedies no longer touched me. I unhurriedly washed my porcelain cup, wiped it dry, and put it back in the sideboard behind the glass. I walked through the apartment. The sunlight had moved. Now it was illuminating the old photographs on the wall. There I am, very young, with two tight braids, standing next to my father at that first piano. There is my Leo, young and handsome, hugging me at our wedding. There is little Alex laughing, sitting on my lap. Before, these photographs used to cause me a sharp nostalgia for what was gone. Now I looked at them with a quiet gratitude. It had all happened. It was my life. But it hadn't ended there on these faded cards. It was continuing here and now. Around noon the doorbell rang. A short businesslike ring. Not the impatient, demanding trill with which Alex and Stella usually announced their arrival. I opened it without asking who was there. On the threshold stood two men in work uniforms. "Hello, delivery for Lydia Baranova. Will you accept?" asked the older one. "Yes, of course, come in," I answered, and my heart, for the first time in 24 hours, trembled, but not from pain but from anticipation. They walked into the living room, carefully stepping on the old parquet floor. Behind them, a large, bulky object, wrapped in a thick gray cloth, slowly and solemnly floated into the apartment. They carefully placed it in the very corner where my father's piano had once stood, the very empty corner that for decades had silently reminded me of my sacrifice. "Here, sign for receipt." The worker held out a form. "Will you be unwrapping it yourself?" "Yes, myself. Thank you very much." When the door closed behind them, I froze for a few moments. I looked at this silent, gray monolith standing in my living room. It looked like a sleeping beast, like frozen music. I approached and carefully, with my fingertips, pulled at the edge of the cloth. It slid down, revealing a shiny, polished black surface. It was it. A beautiful, severe piano. Not an antique like my father's, but a modern one, but with classic, clean lines. I ran my hand over the lacquered wood. It was cool and smooth. I lifted the lid over the keyboard. The white and black keys sparkled like a promise. This was my real gift. Not to Michael. To myself. I had been saving money for it for even longer than for that banquet. It was my secret dream, my last rebellion, which no one knew about. I thought that maybe someday later. And now this later had come. Towards evening, the doorbell rang again. This time the ring was uncertain, short, almost apologetic. I knew who it was. On the threshold stood Michael, alone. He was dressed in smart trousers and a new shirt, clearly prepared for the restaurant. He was pale, and there was confusion in his eyes. It was obvious that he had been sent to scout, to soften me up, to become the very child whom I had supposedly punished. "Hello, Grandma," he said quietly, not looking up. "Hello, Michael, come in." He entered the hallway and only then raised his head. His gaze fell on the piano. He froze. His mouth fell slightly open. His whole mission, all the words that his parents had probably put into him, were forgotten in an instant. He looked at the instrument as one looks at a miracle. What is that?" he whispered. "It's a piano," I smiled. "My gift. Remember I told you it would be just for us." He slowly, as if afraid of scaring away a vision, approached it. He carefully touched one key with his finger, then another. He had never seen a real large instrument so close, only the synthesizer at their home on which Stella made him practice scales. All his feigned adult tragedy over the spoiled birthday evaporated. Before the piano stood just a 12-year-old boy, mesmerized by beauty. I went and sat on the bench. My fingers lay on the keys. The joints were a little stiff from age, from long disuse. But muscle memory, the memory of the soul, turned out to be stronger than time. I played a simple, clear C major chord. The sound born in the silence was deep, rich, alive. It filled the entire apartment, displacing the last shadows of the past. It was not the sound of melancholy or regret. It was the sound of a promise, the sound of a new life. Michael looked at me, and his face lit up with a pure, unfeigned delight. "Play something, Grandma, please." And I began to play. A simple lullaby that I used to hum to him when he was a tiny baby. The melody flowed from under my fingers, easily and freely. My home had ceased to be a waiting room, a transit point, or an on-demand ATM. It had once again become what it should have always been. A home of music, a temple of art. And my goal now was not to serve those who did not appreciate it, but to share the joy of creation with the only person who saw in me not a function but me. While I was playing and Michael, having pulled up a chair, was watching my hands, I, with my free left hand, opened my handbag which was standing nearby. I took out a small bar of expensive dark chocolate with orange peel. I had bought it this morning at a pastry shop just for myself because I wanted to. I broke off a piece and put it in my mouth. The bitter sweetness slowly melted on my tongue. Michael, emboldened, reached out and pressed one of the keys in the upper register. A thin crystal sound was heard. He looked at me with the delight of a discoverer. I smiled at him, and at that moment, looking at his shining face, at my hands that had once again found their purpose, I thought with absolute clarity, the money for that banquet was not wasted. It was the price I paid for my own soul, and it was the best investment of my life. Thank you for being with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and write in the comments if you have had to deal with similar situations, or what you think about the heroine's actions. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Be healthy and please live truly.